chairman of the board of Pipestone Holdings. He's now chair emeritus, but just moved to Sioux Falls recently, has a condo at Washington Square, and walked to Rotary today. And I know he's going to be a good member. And I'm pleased to introduce Gordon to you so he can tell you more about himself. Gordon Sprunk.
What do I say, right? Yeah, well, what do I say, right? Everything I say now will just be repetitive. My name is Gordon Sprunk. Thank you for the opportunity to be part of your organization. I am very happily a resident of South Dakota for all the obvious reasons, right? And of downtown. I was selling the attributes of that to our table. Happy to represent that to downtown residency to anyone who wants to listen. A father and a grandfather, the activities that the governor so eloquently explained. We fulfill our mission at Pipestone of helping farmers by strategic partnerships, of which one is the Holstone project here. Happy to talk more about that, and that might be one small way I could contribute of explaining not only old agriculture, right? Some of us, or all of us, are 1, 2, or 3 generations away from the farm, but many of us may not understand what's happening on the farm today, not only here, but in China or Japan or Mexico or Brazil, where we're all active. With today's communication skills, we literally have those kind of calls nearly every day. And so happy to make that contribution to your success here jointly to make Sioux Falls and the state of South Dakota successful. Thank you.
Welcome, Gordon. And while we take a photo, I'll ask Erik, Janet, and Dr. Stanley to make their way to the stage. Yeah, Cindy Peterson woke up without a voice. So we are attempting a first in Rotary history here to have someone preside and moderate at the same time. And we'll see how this goes. I appreciate your patience and really excited about today's panel. Heavy topic, but an important one. And we strive really, really hard at Rotary to be a place where important conversations happen. And this is a conversation that is timely in a number of ways, and I'll just share those with you, and then I want to hear introductions, and we'll let the panelists introduce themselves. September was National Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. This week is Mental Illness Awareness Week, and Sunday is World Mental Health Day. So, real timely conversation, and one that I'm honored to have the panelists that we have that are going to give us perspective on is a topic that if it hasn't impacted your family directly, it has likely impacted you in one way or another with someone that you know throughout the community. Let's go ahead and start with Erik. If you wanted to share personal, professional background, a little bit about Lost&Found, which is new to Sioux Falls, and then what puts you in a unique position to speak on this topic.
Thanks, Tony. So Erik Muckey, background, I grew up in Corsica, South Dakota, so not too far down the road from Tony. USC Econ grad. I just moved back actually to Sioux Falls, so glad to be back with you all here. I was in Twin Cities for about 4 years, finished a pair of master's degrees at the Carlson School. I got my MBA there, and then I got a Master of Public Policy from the Humphrey School of Public Affairs, a little bit of nonprofit management thrown in. I'm a former financial services guy, so I worked for Citi and Meta for a handful of years and also with Sunrise Banks. But my sort of background mostly has been sort of in the background anyway, nonprofit management. So I spent about 13 years in nonprofits, some in youth leadership in South Dakota, and then Lost&Found. Lost&Found, Sioux Falls-based 501c3 organization. We do work in comprehensive suicide prevention programs for young adults, 15 to 34, mostly focusing on post-secondary institutions, which I know get into a little bit. Our team, and I know we have one of our staff here with us today and a few friends from the field as well. We're a team of public health, student services, and trained program evaluation specialists. So that's really what we do. We help college campuses primarily find best ways to prevent suicide through student programs, evaluation and research, and then advocacy and training as well. And so glad to be here, Tony, and really glad to share a little bit more about Lost and Found. We're probably one of the better kept secrets in Sioux Falls. We've been around for about 11 years, but our model is fairly new, and been kind of, like I said, glad to be back and leading the team from afar for the last 5 years in the city. So nice to be back in downtown.
Excellent. Welcome back to Sioux Falls, and great to have you here today. Fellow Rotarian Janet Kittams, I want to share, we know you, we know the Helpline Center. Maybe share a few things that maybe we wouldn't know about what your organization does.
Sure. The Helpline Center has been around for a long time, since 1974. Excuse me. So the Helpline Center has been involved in suicide prevention for quite some time. As you may know, we have a couple of different phone numbers that people reach out to us 24 hours a day for accessing support or help. But we also do a lot of work with survivors, those family and friends that are left behind when there's been a death by suicide. We do a lot of outreach to them and grief support groups. And that's kind of a hidden secret of the Helpline Center. So we're on the back end really supporting those individuals. And then in addition to that, we do a lot of suicide prevention training, a lot of discussion out in the community about that. I just want to say that thank you, Tony, for bringing this issue forward. You know, I've been working in suicide prevention for over 25 years. And it used to literally be, I felt like me who was talking about this. So this is wonderful to have people who are engaged and interested in talking openly about suicide prevention. That means a lot to me, and I can definitely see the progress that we've made, not only in our community, in our state, but across the country. We're certainly not there yet. There's a lot of work that needs to be done yet, but we definitely have made progress over the years. And so I'm very happy to be here today and share even more about some things that we have upcoming that I think are really going to lead the way.
Yeah, thank you, Janet. Thanks for being here and sharing. And also Dr. Stanley's with Avera Behavioral Health, and part of my interest in this, my wife spent a decade working alongside Dr. Stanley at Avera Behavioral Health as a child psychologist. So really passionate about mental health and specifically this topic. You want to share your background and the work that you're doing at Avera?
Sure. I'm from Shenandoah, Iowa, which is clear down in the corner of Iowa, about 15 miles from Missouri and 20 from Nebraska. And South Dakota was never on my radar. I actually came up here to play football for the Jackrabbits, met my wife, who's from Harold, South Dakota. We went away for med school. In my first year residency, she became pregnant with twins, which is when we all come running back to home. And so we've been here for, daughters are 28 years or so. So I finished my residency up here, been practicing for Avera essentially ever since. Board certified in psychiatry as well as board certified in addiction medicine. And, you know, been fortunate to work for Avera. We've had a very strong commitment to behavioral health. You've all seen us grow over the years and probably tracked some of our programs. Worked with Janet for years. In fact, we'd be embarrassed to say how far back we worked. I was still a resident, I think, when we first met, which is pretty old. And Erik is a recent friend, and one of the great things I do enjoy about South Dakota and Sioux Falls is the ability to know the people you're working with and kind of come together as a community. And I think, as Janet said and Erik said, difficult topic, affects all of us. But I'm really encouraged by the community and I think the professionals and the attitude that we are going to change things. And I believe there is something of a rising social consciousness around behavioral health, perhaps due to the pandemic, perhaps due to other reasons, but it's encouraging.
Yeah, great. We'll get into that. Before we go ahead and jump into questions and conversation before this panel, we talked about a number of definitions. Erik, you want to just frame up when we talk prevention, intervention, postvention? Share with us that so that the audience understands, because we'll probably use those words throughout our conversation today.
Well, I'll also say too, colleagues on the floor, correct me if I'm misstating or going in any direction, but one way to kind of frame, I guess, the suicide prevention ecosystem is to use the terms, what we call prevention, intervention, and postvention. So prevention, really thinking front end, what is sort of the education about the warning signs, the awareness, what is the problem we're trying to address, and what contributes to suicide risk and protective factors. Intervention, really talking about a lot of, I would say, very much what Janet does, and also what Dr. Stanley does at Avera. So you're thinking about the actual intervention during crisis. So a mental health crisis, a suicide crisis, where you're trying to ensure that somebody's getting access to care. And postvention, you're really talking about support kind of on the back end. You might not hear the word postvention used very frequently, but essentially think of the support in the aftermath of a suicide attempt or a suicide death. I would also say kind of there's some extension you could say as well for somebody who has experienced an inpatient stay as well and is sort of re-entering the community after a very intensive set of care. There's other terms you can get into, especially when it comes to suicide. I know, again, I encourage Janet and Dr. Stanley to jump in on this too. We try to say things like, for example, rather than saying commit suicide, somebody died by suicide or was a suicide death. When we talk about mental health, everybody has mental health. Think of it kind of like physical health. But if you're experiencing a mental health condition, that's where you start getting the language of what a mental illness looks like, for example. Or another big one I would say too is when we think about, and I know Janet would have a lot to say about this, suicide attempt survivors, suicide loss survivors. When we talk about suicide, we don't talk about a successful or unsuccessful attempt. You want to sort of create some language around a suicide attempt survivor in this case. And I think also, the other thing I would just throw in, Tony, and again, just thinking about the language we use, we really try to focus on the disorder versus labeling. So you're not a schizophrenic, you're not bipolar, you have a bipolar disorder, you have a schizoaffective disorder. So kind of trying to center around very people first language and sort of the language of when we think about suicide prevention, you might think of a lot of different terms for that, but there's a really large ecosystem of resources and providers in Sioux Falls that are trying to make a difference in this space.
And one of those resources is sdsuicideprevention.org, which learned a wealth of information out there. And in preparing for this, learned that 1 in 5 of us deals with a mental health illness, and as high as 71% of adults report having at least one symptom of anxiety, stress, feelings of being overwhelmed. So this is impacting whether or not it gets to that level. The mental health and what you described is an impact on all of us. Maybe, and I'll open this up to all three of you. How are we doing here in the state of South Dakota, in the community that surrounds Sioux Falls, when it comes to preventing suicide?
How are you, Janet?
Well, I think, as I said before, we've certainly made progress. I think I've been pleased with just the more open conversation that we have in general going on in our community about mental health, about how people can access resources and support. So I see that as a win. I'll just give an example. With the Helpline Center, we answer calls every day where people have needs. And many times they have multiple needs in their life, but more times than not, they're related to mental health issues, substance use issues that are going on. And so we've certainly seen an uptick in those phone calls over the past year and a half. And some of that certainly is related to the pandemic, but I think another part of that is related to people's willingness to ask for help and to reach out. And to me, that means there's been a reduction in the stigma surrounding these tough conversations in our community and across our state. So we certainly have a ways to go, but we've made progress.
Yeah, I could follow up
go
on
ahead.
that. I would agree 100%. I think one of the lessons that we take away from COVID is that we all learned that there are times when we need to ask for help. It's one of the things that I heard from a psychiatrist colleague of mine, you were all kind of aware of some of the struggles the healthcare industry itself went through with our providers and practitioners and the stress they underwent, are still undergoing to some degree. But I think the important thing about behavioral health is we've just never felt comfortable discussing it with family, primary care. You know, you think about it, how often do you have that conversation with your primary care physician? But as you mentioned the numbers, if you look at common illnesses, it's certainly one of the most common. So that is the number one thing we could do in reducing stigma, and I think improving outcomes across the state, across the nation, is just to embrace the idea that it's part of our health, not our mental health or our physical health. It's just part of our health. It's part and parcel of what we need to be aware of and talking about.
Yeah. I think when folks identify an issue, they want to point us to the why. Why are we having these issues? One of those whys in this area seems to be social media, video games, screens. Let's talk about adolescents, young adults. Last month, Wall Street Journal had a number of stories, pretty damning stories regarding Instagram, Facebook, and its effects, specifically on teenage girls. You want to talk about the correlation between the rise of social media and what we're seeing in your various practices?
Well, I can touch on that first. First of all, it was amazing to me that it took that long to break, because that was not new data. That's been coming out for several years, the negative impact of social media. And particularly, we do know from the more recent data on young women, I don't know if it's a direct correlation, but over the last decade, the fastest growing demographic for suicide has been young women aged 10 to 14 at like 200 to 300% increase in the suicide rate. So we know, and we have known for quite a while, that social media in general has a negative impact on mood. We don't allow it in any of our behavioral health facilities for a variety of reasons, that being one of them. Confidentiality and the potential for people to break that with those media is part of it. I think when we look at, over the last 2 decades, the suicide has become the second leading cause of death from age 10 to 34. So if you think about that, the second leading cause of death, and that tremendous, this is like, to me, it always feels like this is robbing us of our best and brightest. But yet you haven't heard the hue and cry that you would think from a second leading cause of death. So there are a number of reasons, I think, why that has increased. And I can't point at all at social media, but I think it has had a tremendously traumatic impact. What's hard is when you talk to parents about how do you control that, or kids, it's become so integrated into, in fact, I just did a Prairie Doc the other day, and of course it's live broadcast on Facebook. So everything kind of revolves around social media anymore. It's very difficult to contain and control.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the thing I think is important to keep in mind for South Dakota, and then just generally when we talk about suicide. So suicide generally, and I'm saying this a little bit as putting on a different hat, as an economist. I teach for USD. Suicide very much is a lagging indicator, and so we're really thinking about the data that leads into that. There's obviously a lot of factors that go into suicide. So in South Dakota, we've lost 812 South Dakotans between the ages of 10 to 39 to suicide since 2011, which is pretty damning when you think about it. What I think is important, and I don't know if you can necessarily correlate that to social media per se, but I think it's important to think about what is the content that's being pushed through and sponsored, and sort of the way that algorithms are designed to essentially create somewhat of an addiction, if you will. And so I think one of the things we have to think about, and what are organizations in South Dakota doing to address this? I think the ways that we could probably help best at this moment, honestly, is creating better content. If we're going to at least reach people in a certain way and train, parents and families, sort of how do you engage with the content? That's where sort of the work gets done. But yeah, when you think about sort of the impact, can we draw a direct correlation? I'm not sure that you can, but I think it's important to kind of keep that in mind, that it is a factor. especially for many young adults, where that might be their one form of connection, and there might be sort of an isolation that comes along with engaging in that type of content. So I know as organizations, we all have our different roles to play together, but it's very much a sort of how do you actually bring content to the forefront that parents and families can engage with, but then also the young adults who are using the platforms, how are they being reached by our organizations with mental health content?
Yeah. Is there a level of where it's folks, schools that have gone through it, where they see attention being brought to someone that has passed away from some suicide? Is it almost self-fulfilling in a way where I'm just trying to get into the mind of a 14-year-old that sees that as the way out? Maybe speak a little bit, remove social media from it, but kind of the motivations that come in what you deal with when you're working with your patients. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Do you want to?
Sure. I mean, I think I want to just tag on a little bit what Erik was talking about and just talk a little bit about not only the content, but to me, it's the conversation after the content. So that child or teen is on social media and they're seeing things that are upsetting or disturbing to them. They need to have that conversation with an adult, a parent, about what did they see? How did that make them feel? Because I think that's what seems to be missing in this, is that so much of that is internalized and they're judging themselves based upon what they see other people are posting on that social media. So we need to bring that out in the open, and you need to have a conversation about that with that teenager and with that adult, with that, whether it's a parent or somebody else who's caring in their life. And to me, that will lead down a path that's a healthier interpretation or use of that social media, because we can't eliminate social media.
Right.
Social media is not going to go away. So how do we learn to live with it in a healthy way? And I think so much of that is not keeping it hidden and we need to talk more about those feelings that go along with it.
Yeah, I would say it's very difficult because, the studies, particularly with those young women, it was about their body image and seeing other people and how they portrayed and all that. Things that even with a conversation are difficult to reverse once it's in your mind that, you're overweight compared to other girls, or this is how you have a good time. This is what I do every day. So it's that constant comparison of people's best image on Facebook and otherwise. And then there's bullying and other factors. I think it's an incredible uphill battle. I know we can't make it go away, but as I said, as a parent, even those discussions, and you're fortunate if you can get your teenager to have a frank discussion with you, but controlling that is, it's a very big ask. And I think we've opened a really toxic Pandora's box and we don't really know how to control it. And I agree, we're not going to make it go away, but I do think at least the transparency now of, hey, there's multiple studies that say this is damaging stuff. At least the conversation started. We have to do something different, particularly, as I said, when you look at the suicide rate and some of the things that are occurring out there that would, if not be directly correlated, appear to have some degree of cause and effect.
So we talked about reducing the stigma, having the open conversations, having conversations with those where there might be red flags. We talk about what else can be done, what is being done across the state, across the community that we as Rotarians may not know that it's happening.
Sure, I'll just jump in and talk a little bit about, to me, I think there's been a lot more cohesiveness and collaboration work that's been taking place across the state. I think there has been a strategy for suicide prevention, a document in the state for decades. But what happened in 2019 is the governor's office at that point brought 5 departments together to really take a look at what that strategy was for the state of South Dakota. And I think in bringing everybody to the table has really made a difference in a unified voice about this topic, and that what needs to happen to kind of rectify the number of people were losing to suicide. So that's made a difference. And in addition to that, I'm just going to speak to other changes that I've seen. The Helpline Center has the privilege of partnering with a lot of state departments. We work hand in hand with Department of Social Services and the Department of Health on a daily basis, managing mental health and suicide-related issues. So the thing that I am most excited about is the transformation of the 1-800 number that the Helpline Center currently answers. We answer the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which is a lovely number that's been out there for a long time for people all over the country to call if they're in a suicide crisis. Nobody in this room knows that phone number. I can guarantee you right now, if I ask you what that phone number is, nobody knows that. So they're transforming that number to a 3-digit number, 988. And I don't think we can think of a time in our lives where we didn't know what the other most common 3-digit phone number, 911, what life was like without 911. So that is the vision of 988. We will be giving people the ability to access information, resources, crisis support any time of the day by dialing 3 numbers, 988. That will happen across the country in July of next year. And I am just, I can't say enough about that, because when we go out and talk at the Helpline Center and the people are reluctant to reach out for help, and the whole, where do I go? Who do I talk to? Because it's kind of a maze of where do you get mental health resources. So this is going to simplify things in an amazing way, not just in Sioux Falls, the entire state of South Dakota, and the entire country. Everybody will have access to this 3-digit phone number. So in addition to that, what has happened in the state of South Dakota, which I think is amazing, they've taken it one step further. We have a planning group right now that's been working on planning the rollout of 988 for the past several months. But not only are we talking about the rollout of how you get help through 988, but we're talking about the Crisis Now model. The Crisis Now model is not only an access point, which is like the 988 phone number, but it's somebody to respond. How are we going to respond to somebody who's in crisis and needs immediate assistance? Perhaps a mobile crisis team or something similar to that. And then the third part of that is having some place where they could receive that safe care. Some type of hospitalization if that's necessary, some inpatient care. And so the state, through our planning group, is working on building up all 3 of those areas so that they can all work in conjunction. Because it's not going to be helpful for 988, for the Helpline Center to answer those phone calls if I don't have resources and programs to get people to for help. And so I think that I am extraordinarily proud of the work that's happening right now in our state to address all of those levels at once, because that's what needs to happen to transform the system that we currently have. And that will reduce suicides, in my belief.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your work on that. You said July of next year, 988. You're working to stand that up right now and staff up for that. So 988 is coming. You mentioned earlier, Dr. Stanley, that Avera has been in this space for commitment to the space for a long time. Talk to us about the Farm and Rural Stress Hotline. We're an ag state, individualistic Americans that we are. Maybe talk about your experience. I believe that you just went online a couple of years ago with that hotline.
Yeah, it's been operational now for just a couple of years. So one of the things we know from, again, operating in the Midwest here for many years is that farmers and ranchers have a unique lifestyle and unique stressors. But also, as you said, a very kind of independent bootstrap kind of mentality where they care for themselves. And to further complicate it, they're often in rural communities where they're well known in that community. It's very difficult to reach out for help or acknowledge any kind of problem. So we wanted to create something that would allow a very confidential way to contact a mental health provider. And in fact, we have a PA, Carl Elke, who himself is an active farmer, and he's off 2 weeks right now harvesting. So good for him. I hope he's enjoying it. But he takes those calls, or most of those calls we try to direct to him, at least those that come in during the day. If not, we arrange an appointment for a telephone interview. our idea was that, and in fact, it's happened to Carl, a farmer could be out in the cab of his tractor working and actually talking on the phone to Carl about what's going on and how he's feeling. Doesn't have to drive his pickup and park in front of the physician's office and go through the staff who probably have known him for 30 years. So that's been incredibly well received. And we've had a couple of national organizations that have wanted to kind of duplicate that or expand that. Unfortunately, this year is another example of, that if it's not one thing, it's another in that industry. And so it's been a tough year. We continue to take calls on that with relative frequency. I know I was talking to the nurse who works on this, and I said, hey, I'm going to talk about this today. Anything I should share? She said, well, I don't know. It's been very successful. We've had some great stories. She said, I can tell you, there's one farmer that drove 2.5 hours to come in and tell Carl, thank you. So I would say that's a pretty good sign, at least one.
It sounds like South Dakota.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
On that line, your commitment to behavioral or mental health, we've been driving by 229 and seeing construction happening. Talk about what that expansion will do. I think we're coming up on 20 years with behavioral health facility out there, but you're growing. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, when we built that, and you're right, it's about 16 years since we originally put that in the ground. We thought that we would be good till the year 2025 with that. We've been filling up over the last several years, which is fortunate and unfortunate at the same time. So we've become a wonderful access point. It's really hard when someone from Sioux Falls, though, needs help, and you have to tell them, there's no room at the end. It's been particularly dramatic during the pandemic with children. I think we don't always recognize that our adolescents have struggled so much. Points out, in my mind, some of the importance of social outlets that are positive, like school and things that were deprived, or those kids were deprived from. So we've been particularly busy there. What we've been very fortunate to have is a lot of community support. So we're building that fourth wing on behavioral health almost exclusively with funds raised within the community to support. The Helmsley Charitable Trust, in fact, gave us a very large commitment to get that started. But within that, we talk about behavioral health, and Janet was talking about access being key, and I would agree. One of the biggest challenges in behavioral health is how to navigate the system, because people, you normally go to your primary care if you have a medical issue. People appear to be less comfortable with that. So I think we all probably get a lot of phone calls asking, where do I start? Well, as part of this, there's some unique programs we're standing up in that new building. One of those is a psychiatric acute care. So it'll be a 24/7 walk-in. We'll probably staff it with advanced practice nurses and PAs around the clock. We'll also have our usual assessment team, which are all master's level counselors assessing patients. Then, of course, nursing and behavioral health techs and security. It's kind of a new day we live in as well. We have to beef up our security quite a bit because we've had a few incidents out there or near calls. But so that should be a wonderful access point, unique, I think, to a community this size. Within that, we'll also have some acute crisis stabilization, so you don't necessarily have to be admitted to the hospital. We can put you in an observation unit for up to 24 hours, help you calm down or give you some medication to get to a point where you could go home. The other kind of unique, we're bringing our geriatric psychiatric unit back to the campus. We had moved it out to the Prince of Peace campus, and we're making that a little larger. It's another population with growing needs. We're all kind of aware of the baby boomer aging phenomena. Some of us are in it, but
We'll talk about that next week. Come back.
so that's a population that is growing. We also are creating our first adolescent addiction unit. We have about 60 adolescent beds currently. As I said, they're frequently full. One of the things we're continuing to note is the co-occurring addiction disorders. It's very powerful here in Sioux Falls, the number of addictions going on. It's usually about 60% of our inpatient population has a co-occurring addiction issue of some type. So with adolescents, that's a 28-day residential program. So they'll stay there for 4 weeks, get treatment and recovery. We're also adding an adolescent partial hospital so they can continue to attend school for part of the day, but come in for intense group therapy for the rest of the day for several weeks or months as needed. So kind of an intermediate level of care we didn't have before. We've got some shelf space to expand adult beds, or we may look at some other specific disorder we want to address.
Yeah, thank you. I think it speaks to not only a growing community, but a growing need, and hopefully folks that are reaching out. You mentioned staffing in there, and staffing, new building. Every business leader in our community in the region has been talking about workforce. Talk to us about, are we having enough professionals go into this as a career, and what do you see as you play this out the next 5-10 years?
We were talking about this beforehand. Eric, you had some thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. In the space that we operate in, we're very much a prevention organization working primarily with post-secondary institutions. So anything from the USCs and SCSUs of the world to the Western Dakota Techs, like area techs. So very wide range of institutions. And the number one thing they will tell you every time is they do not have enough counselors. They do not have enough support. We just had a conversation with Black Hills State. They just lost one of their counselors 2 months into the role. It's a challenging industry to be in, partially because of as you can imagine, with the difficulty of conversation, a lot of burden to take on, educational elements that are coming in, but honestly, the economics of it too. We know in this profession that a lot of professionals in mental health are not getting paid enough to stay in the roles that are in relative to other positions that they could be in. And so, we see that in a lot of industries. I don't think that's anything necessarily new that many folks in this room have seen in other industries as well, but particularly for an issue that is so palpable and so hard to grasp in South Dakota at times, not having enough, especially when it comes to serving young adults with that population about 10 to 39, we really have something on our hands that we got to get our arms wrapped around sooner rather than later.
Yeah. Anything you want to add
I
to
would
that?
just say
You're
that-
staffing up,
I think
adding to your call center.
the additional challenge to what Eric just talked about is the Helpline Center operates 24 hours a day, just as Avera operates 24 hours a day. And so we're not only recruiting folks in that professional mindset from the mental health field, but they have to be willing to work at midnight or the weekend or Christmas or Thanksgiving. And that is extraordinarily challenging to recruit individuals to work those different days, those different hours. I think as Avera is expanding their services and the Helpline Center is expanding our services with 988, we'll continue to face that challenge of recruiting people who really want to make a difference. What I tell people is that it is one of the most rewarding types of jobs and professions you can be in, because every day you see how you changed somebody's life, how you made a difference. And that's what you take with you when you walk out of the office at the end of your shift. And it's not, you can't say that with every profession that you're in. So we hope that that carries through and that entices people to get into the field.
Yeah, there's a tremendous shortage of nurses in general, and behavioral health actually takes a very kind of unique nurse or a unique individual, whether you're a tech or a nurse. There's probably, and I hate to admit this, there's probably no other nursing job where you're more likely to get hit than in a behavioral health facility. We have psychotic patients, we have intoxicated or meth psychotic patients, we have demented patients who don't know any better. So it is a unique skill set and unique people that work there, but I would say that we're very fortunate to have some incredibly committed people, but it will continue to be a challenge. I don't see any wonderful solution to this, but as Janet said, I think when you get it, when it flips your switch, you're in it for life. And fortunately, we have a lot of people that are committed to it. I will say this, though, as you said, it can be rewarding, but it can also be deeply traumatic almost. So as I tell our residents in training, your successes are often subtle and your failures are dramatic. So it can be a pretty tough profession to kind of spend a career on.
Yeah, and it's been a tough 18 months for all of us. We have a lot of business leaders in the room and joining us online. What's your message to employers? What are one or two takeaways as they go back with their teams? If it's at 71% of us, then 7 out of 10 on our teams are going through something. What's your message to business leaders in the community at large?
Yeah,
Eric, you want to go ahead and take that?
I think the biggest thing, I think each of our organizations has different approaches to this. And we're very collaborative in the space. I think Janet couldn't have said it better. The thing that's hopeful for South Dakota is there is more collaboration happening in the space. What I think when I think about our respective organizations, what Lost&Found really focuses on, because we're a post-secondary institute, we focus on post-secondary institutions, is we provide a lot of sort of the training and education facilitated with partners like Helpline or Avera Behavioral. We're really trying to focus on emotional intelligence training almost in a way. You're really trying to provide that education to say, you're going here for an education, you're going to go into the workforce. What other skills are you getting to prepare for life after college? And kind of get that sort of sense of personal resilience, building those protective factors against suicide, because that's really, when you look at them, that's really what it looks like. The other thing I would say to employers too is, when you're thinking about your employees, think about prevention the way that we do, and that we know that you have to target experiences. Everybody's experience is going to be different, which makes it difficult to prevent suicide in many ways. But one of the reasons why suicide prevention in the ecosystem is more intensive now than it probably has been in terms of needs for investment and support is we're learning more about what mental health experiences are at different age brackets, different life experiences, different socioeconomic brackets. We have to be mindful though. So I really would just encourage you as employers, think about the demographics of your employees, get to know sort of what their individualized needs look like, and then start to look at, there's a lot of trainings available, there's a lot of support available. Not everything is going to be one size fits all. As long as you're thinking about that first and foremost when you're preparing, that will definitely help with your outcomes when it comes to mental health in your workplace.
Yeah, quick comment. I would say as employers, Janet was talking about access, which is critical, and we are expanding that. But, we get data on those who commit suicide, and I know those who have touched the Avera system and go on to commit suicide. Unfortunately, only about mid-30s of those were actually identified as having a disorder and seeing a counselor. So that leaves 2/3 that no one even suspected, or there was no potential there to intervene. I think that speaks maybe to a lot of things, but one of those is what we said earlier, just that stigma, that inability or discomfort with being able to talk about these issues, or maybe it's not even knowing that there are options for treatment. So I think as employers, actually for all of us, to just spread the idea that it is okay to ask for help, it's okay to need help. I know that just as we've tried to do with addictions, it is rescuing, maintaining your workforce. Addictions, by the way, are one of the highest risk factors for suicide as well. So as employers, if you could just make it a safe environment for people to acknowledge a need or to ask for help or to discuss those kind of things, that would be my greatest ask of today.
Yeah, thank you. And we're right at the top of the hour, but one final question. Maybe your message to individuals that are struggling. It's a two-part question. And then what gives you hope? What gives you optimism in the work that you do that can be very challenging? So message to individuals and optimism or hope as we go out into the community this week.
I think the message to individuals is very much what we've been talking about today on this stage, is that there is help out there, and there's hope that the pain that you're feeling will ease and can get better. So please reach out, talk to somebody, whether that's a friend, a family member, calling the helpline, just asking for that help. There's people out there who want to be there with you to walk down that path. And what gives me hope is those reflections back from our callers. We just had a caller who called us at the end of last week to share with staff in particular just the difference that phone call had made to them, that we were there to walk alongside them when they were in a really, really dark time. And they called us because a friend of theirs had recommended calling the helpline because their friend had been actively suicidal, and we helped that person to get them to a place of safety and security. And he said, I knew if you could do that for my friend, you could do that for me too. So that's what gives me hope, is every day when you hear stories like that.
Excellent. Anything else? Message to family or?
Just again, reflecting kind of on what Janet said, as individuals, I think it's important for us to know that there is hope. I think as families and friends, I think it's important to know that what somebody is experiencing may not necessarily be a reflection of who they are as a person. You're talking about a disease, and it can be fairly sinister when you're talking about suicide ideation and mental health. So it's important to kind of hold space for that. And I guess kind of adding to what Jan said, the optimism in South Dakota at this point is that we as collaborators and partners are coming together to have conversations that have not been brought up before, particularly when it comes to how we approach crisis care, postvention care, thinking about sort of the system and ecosystems of how we talk to folks here in the room, but then also talking to young adults who, if you're experiencing a mental health condition, you may not be in the headspace to know how to navigate what you're going through at that moment in time. So if we have the tools, and kind of adding to a previous question, if we individually and as employers decide to legitimize training on a much wider scale, it gets a lot easier for us to have those conversations with folks who are struggling. And that's what gives me hope, is we're getting there.
Yeah. Thank you, Eric. Anything, Dr. Stanley, you want to add to that as we move forward?
So it's very difficult for me because I'm sitting here with a survivor of a patient I treated who unfortunately committed suicide. So I don't want to imply that we can help everyone, but I would say that the ability to ask for help and stay the course. I've seen many people in the depths of despair recover, and I've had many people come to me and say, I can't imagine I was ever there. I can't imagine that I ever thought of taking my life. And they go on to describe to me all the wonderful things that are going on. So it is a disease. It will change the way you think. It is a powerful disease. It's so powerful that I've had patients with depression that hear the voice of God, or hear someone giving commands. If it can change that much, it surely can change your perception of what's good and bad in your life. So respect that it is a terrible disease, but like any disease, there's a treatment, and you have to seek help. And we are getting better every year with our ability to treat people. I think that again, the key is building strength within our communities, and protective factors, some of which are being destroyed, family, religion, some of those things that have traditionally protected us are kind of under assault and under decline. So we have to look at a community as, how do we replace those kind of things? How do we create better communities and more resilient individuals as they grow up?
Yeah. Well, thank you. Please join me in thanking our panelists today, Dr. Stanley, Janet, and Eric. And thank you for staying a few extra minutes. Come back next week. We're going to talk about innovation in aging, and have a couple panelists that are going to talk about that. With that, Rotary is adjourned. Have a great week.